I will be reading from the book called Tempus, Procedium, written by Ernest L. Norman. Chapter 35, Angels, Devils, and Demons. In the liturgies and expressionary elements of Unarius, there has been on several occasions mention of devils or of how devils became angels. It is conceivable that some person or student may, to some extent, misunderstand these statements. Therefore, it would serve a good purpose if we might fully explore this dimension of introspection, and which would also serve a double purpose, inasmuch as it would acquaint any person or student with these particular dimensions of expression which are everywhere about him, or in which he could conceivably become so enmeshed at some future time. Our future classification of devils should be made clear and distinct. They should not be confused with one other classification which could more properly be called demons. Everyone who has seen pictures of devil masks used by natives of Africa or in religious ceremonies in Tibet has seen these weirdly carved and contorted figure faces used on these occasions. They were called devils, but most properly should be called demon forms, for the witch doctors or priests which contrived these forms did so somewhat in replica or facsimile from the demon forms which they had envisioned, perhaps in a trance state, or even brought back the memory of these visionary forms from one of the underworlds. Briefly, then, a demon is simply one or more astral bodies which have undergone a complete deformation of all forms and continuities in the waveform structures of these astral psychic anatomies. They are oscillating without cause or purpose. They are wildly gyrating in numerous expressionary elements without thought or cause. Therefore, these expressionary elements, if they could be considered as a personal form, they would indeed have a very insane attitude towards all things involved. So much more so that they would become extremely violent and destructive in all intents and purposes. On the other hand, a devil is still a rather intelligent person in earth-world evaluations, intelligent, that is, in the reactionary factors of the material world. In fact, the first mention of the devil in the Bible refers to a son of God has cast out who was cast out from heaven unto the earth. Therefore, the implication clearly states that the earth is a hell, for God really cast his Son into hell for insubordination. Briefly, then, a devil can be classified as any individual who does, in all intent and purpose in his daily life, use such forms and expressions for his own personal gain or his own selfish interests, without thought, without consideration for the purposes and the life of other people. Therefore, in a general classification, we might say that almost all human beings, non-Unarians, would come under this heading as we see them going about their daily task. They are under the carnal law of the jungle, or the earth world, first and primarily interested in and motivated by the interests of self. They survive by the different reactionary complexes which have been fostered and engendered in these earth world existences. However, these people do have a saving grace. That is, they are for the most part intuitively aware of a certain balance system in these transpositions. They are also aware of great and unknown powers of creation which are quite evident all about them, and so their motivations are to some degree tempered by the thought of some repercussive reaction which might take place if they became wholly engrossed in the selfish attitudes of the material world. They will, therefore, on occasion express some of these more unselfish attitudes. They may even become heroic or use other different forms of expression wherein they portray some of the more ultimate and better qualities of human expression. However, for the most part, humans as a whole are completely ignorant of the vast interplay of cosmic intelligence which is going on about them. Even in their earth life and in their numerous selfish motivations of life, which make life possible for them, they have no way or means of discriminating against others who may be using them for more selfish purposes. In this world today, we can see many more highly developed forms of devils who are expressing some leadership in some form or another wherein they are attempting, so they think, to better the cause of man, at least so far as the exterior surface of their consciousness is concerned. They believe that they are doing good. Actually, however, there is an ulterior motivation behind these movements. Therefore, we can look into such fields as politics, religion, and other different social structures, and we shall see leaders in these fields who are, in their attempts to better the cause of mankind, actually only furthering their own interest and their own intents. They are also furthering the interest of the material world. They are attempting in these efforts so solid they are attempting in these efforts to solidify all people in the earth world and material world dispensations. For all of their thoughts and actions are circumscribed by the usual third dimensional world attitudes and knowledge. It is only when we find an expressionary element or leadership which presents the whole of infinity and the mortality of this infinity. So far as the personal position is concerned, do we find leadership and expression which can be said to be truly motivated by the highest interest? Therefore, it can be said that of this time and day, with the exception of Unarius, there are no other expressionary elements in this world today which do not circumscribe their efforts within the dimension of this material world, and they can therefore all be considered to be devilish forms. Their leaders are, in a sense, devils, for devils still maintain a certain intelligent perspective or attitude towards the material world. They are quite aware of all the reactive factors involved in this third dimensional transition. The same analysis is applied to your own personal evolution. If you are at this time working out karma, and most students are, you therefore can consider your past life and your past lifetimes to have been devilish expressions. You lived in the material world and incurred its karmic intent, and therefore all things which you work out were, in their own time and place, merely purposes served as a devilish form of development. When you realize the implications of this analysis, you will easily see how it is that unless we are very careful in our daily actions and our daily thoughts and in all things that we do, we can easily be led down the garden path. We can very easily deviate at any time from the true course of constructive evolution. The graphic illustrations of the temptation on the mount in the New Testament illustrates the problem which is ever with us. We at all times are being tempted. We are tempted by lax attitudes, by interpermanences, interperances, by intemperances. Oops. Let me start over. We are tempted by lax attitudes, by intemperances, and by compromises. If we give way to these temptations, if we succumb in any particular expressionary form, then it becomes increasingly difficult to reinstate ourselves in that path of evolution. Therefore, if we have become devils, we are in actual reality paying for these things by the tremendous amount of effort, which will and determination that it takes to get back on the constructive pathway of evolution. The term 7 times 7 or 70 times 70 is easily applied in every case. For the deviations into these expressionary forms, which are self-motivated, will, as a consequence, require a greatly increased effort for any person in turn. The sum and total of these expressionary elements in a reversed manner so that they become constructive. Therefore, in the future, do not be tempted by any of these earth life vicissitudes. You will learn that the earth life is a temporal existence, one which is fashioned and contrived in this process of evolution as a way and a means in which you can learn. You can evolve into a higher state of consciousness. You cannot expect to occupy a high state of consciousness without learning in all dimensions the reasons for life, the application of life principles, the evolution of consciousness. These are of the utmost importance, and you could not at any time occupy any position in any spiritual world advanced from the earth until you have undergone this metamorphosis, which is always a part of the earth world function. For the earth world, for the earth world and all other attendant worlds, such as are similar to the world, to the earth world, are in themselves. Let me start over. For the earth world and all other attendant worlds, such as are similar to the earth world, are in themselves similar expressionary or evolutionary elements in your transition or in the transition of any earth human. I could relate to your certain classical examples or stories of individuals who have aspired to a higher way of life and then were tempted and fell to the temptation, and from that time for thousands of years came back into the earth world and fought this personal battle of self-emancipation. Always they seem to be apparently motivated by the most humane interest, by different expressionary forms which in themselves could be considered idealistic in nature or very constructive to those people who were concerned with them. However, as it has always turned out, it became a battle between the old past life and having fallen under the temptation and the superconscious self which has been developed to some degree by this individual before he had fallen under temptation. In certain instances, this battle was always, to some degree, lost to the more negative forces which this person had been so engrossed in expressing. As each life was so manifest in an evolutionary pattern, so did the superconscious self gradually dwindle in its net effect upon the equilibrium or the balance which had been set up in its individual life. And so through passing of many thousands of years and hundreds of earth lives, the person finally emerged only as a very weak earthling, only vaguely inspired to do the right thing. Yet, in attempting to do the right and to work out these karmic impregnations, the person was always ultimately faced with this decision to accept them, and in facing this decision, always reneged on the purpose of the evolution of reincarnation, always rejected the most ultimate purpose which could be served at that moment. This is the problem which you, too, may encounter in your future evolutions, should you be tempted and should you fall victim Should you fall and become one of these more strongly expressed devilish forms which you see about you in your world today, then most surely will you come back to earth, world, time, and time again to try to work out your temptation, to try and reinstate yourself in the evolutionary pathway. The chances of being successful in this endeavor are extremely remote, and while it has been accomplished, it should not be advocated. It should not be inferred that I so advocate such an action, and it should not be misconstrued by any person that such an interference gives him any form of laxity in his daily expression, no more so than the Catholic confessional gives a person a right to commit murder on the premise that he can be forgiven for his sins. For forgiveness is not, in a sense of the word, the action or thought of some deistic God. Forgiveness, in a true sense, means that we have taken the sin and intent of some action and we have reversed its cyclic motion so that it is again reformed in a reconstructive element of expression. Forgiveness is not a prerogative of determination expressed by a priesthood. It is not an expression which can be voiced by any person to another person. It is a personal proposition where we take the negative content of this action and thought and reverse it into something constructive. The effort required to reverse this destructive energy confirmation is, as it can be correctly assumed to be, quite difficult and requires an immense amount more of personal effort than it would have had we taken the same energy waveform and used it constructively in the beginning. This is the problem of all people. At this present time, they are confronted with whether they are on this earth plane at this moment, on some other earth, or in one of the more immediate spiritual planes. The problem of self-determination, that arbitrary value which we see in every life transposition, is that we can use it either constructively for the benefit of infinite intelligence, for the benefit of mankind, or for the benefit of self. These motivations must always be carried on unselfishly, without thought of personal gain. The reward system is dangerous, yet it is a system indulged in by all humanity on the earth planes. Everyone seems to feel the necessity for a reward for any effort which he extends. This is not a constructive motivation. It is destructive because the temptation of self-reward is, in itself, very great. It is one in which every person must constantly equalize within the dimension of his own perspectives. The selfish motivations always determine the success of living in some of these earth worlds. However, in the spiritual worlds, the determinants are quite different. Self can only be expressed in a completely reverse fashion. That is, self is only enlarged or strengthened and fortified. It becomes intelligent only in direct ratio and proportion as to how well we express it outwardly, without selfish motivations, into the infinite cosmos about us. In these earth worlds, the situation is quite the reverse, at least so some think. They believe that they can go from hour to the next, from day to day, from year to year, with nothing but the most selfish motivations within their hearts and minds. Everything concerns them personally, what their value is in these different transitions of life about them. In fact, the world in itself revolves around the little citadel of selfhood. All things must come to them, and this, in a sense, is a devilish form of expression. It is indulged in only by devils, and it will make devils out of anyone who indulges himself in this idle fantasy of life. The evolution of mankind is bidirectional. That is, if we could look into time and space, into infinity, we would see streams of human souls evolving into two directions. They would be evolving upward into the infinite cosmos, becoming more and more intelligent with the passing of millenniums, or conversely, we could see streams of humanity traveling that downward trail into oblivion, people who have fallen victims to numerous selfish devices of their lives. They had succumbed to the numerous temptations. They had made certain compromises. They had lived life without knowledge and without the necessity of evaluating their own existence as the more ultimate achievement of personal expression in the combination with the infinite intelligence. And so these poor souls do travel this downward trail. They may become more highly developed devilish expressions or devils, and they may eventually evolve into lower subastral worlds where they become demons, and demons in turn eventually destroy themselves in the wild convolutions of unintelligent expressions within their own psychic anatomies. Now, the question may arise in your minds: how can we best protect ourselves from these devilish forms and expressions? Fortunately, infinite intelligence has a built-in protection system for everyone. It is simply your attitude of life because, on the basis of frequency relationships, you can completely insulate yourself from the apparitions of physical temptations. You can, in the development of intelligence within which within the dimensions of your own mind, rise to a certain position in your scale of evolution where the devilish forms, the demon apparitions, and other astral underworld characterizations cannot possess you. They cannot influence you, and they cannot intimidate you. They cannot intimidate your thought and action. For the present, however, your greatest protection will be found in how well you apply yourself in all constructive purposes and intents. How will you evaluate your daily life experiences, and how well you can evaluate your position towards infinity? If you do this constructively, if you are not tempted by either the obvious or unobserved temptations which constantly oscillate about you, then you can further your progress. You can be insulated against the apparitions of these devilish forms. You will not be led or influenced by them. In this way, then, you can be reasonably assured that you will have protection. Moreover, there is always the added benefit in your constructive efforts. There are always higher spiritual worlds populated with many millions of more advanced personalities who will, and do on all occasions, further your cause. They will use all means possible to help you in your efforts. They will project energies to you. They will inspire you. They will even use certain scientific instrumentation which they have at their disposal to rectify certain conditions which have been brought in your lifetime. In this present world, you should always realize, however, that you are, to some extent, subjected to a way of life which is generally expressed by mankind. As such, you are harmonically attuned to these earth life dispensations. This, then, will require redoubled effort on your part to keep these things from becoming psychic impregnations, or in other words, that they will become dominant factors in your personality, which will be so expressed in your future evolutions. You can accept these earth world dispensations on a philosophical basis. If you have knowledge of why they exist and how they so transpire, then this will in itself automatically ensure you against psychic impregnation. It will automatically ensure against future incarnations where you will come back with the double burden of karma in these earth life dispensations. This is the purpose of Unarius, to present to you the complete morality of infinity, your own position to infinity, either as a creative and a regenerative entity of expression, or whether you revolve down into one of those lower subastral regions to eventually be absorbed back into the infinite supply. That is why Unarius is unique among all of the other Earth dispensations. In fact, it may appear to be completely opposite from all other Earth life dispensations, for, in truth, it is. It immediately emancipates any person in this presentation of infinite science and in your relationship to infinite expression. You are not bound or fettered by the conformities, the restrictions of your earth world. You have the atmosphere within you. You have the atmosphere wherein you can develop in perfect freedom and in perfect harmony into the more ultimate realizations of human metamorphosis. You can become a spiritual being. You can become practically anything which can be envisioned within your mind. Yes, and even far beyond that. You can become a demon. And as I have forewarned you, you can eventually be absorbed back into the infinite supply. This is the infinite prerogative. It is something which is immediately presented on the face of infinity to every person. The infinite intelligence makes no demand on any person because the infinite is inviolate. It cannot be changed by any human. It is a problem of self-determination, a choice which you and you alone must make. You make this choice in every thought and action, regardless of whether you understand it as such or whether it slips by you unobserved. You have still made a choice. Therefore, let all your future choices and your transitions be constructive in nature. Let them be intelligently expressed. Let them recreate the morality of infinity.